Hey, you gotta hear this wild thing I just came across. Google's quantum AI team dropped this huge 57-page research paper the other day, and inside it, they mentioned the XRP ledger a total of 14 separate times. 14. And almost nobody is talking about it yet. It's crazy how quiet it stayed. This isn't some random paper either. It came from the exact same group of scientists who are busy building those super powerful quantum computers that could completely rewrite the rules of cryptography. You know, the stuff that keeps all our digital secrets safe. Most regular blockchains that people know about, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and even Solana, all depend on one main math trick to stay secure. It's called elliptic curve cryptography, or ECDSA signatures for short. Basically, these are like super strong digital locks on a giant vault. The whole idea behind them is that certain really hard math problems are just too expensive and too slow for normal computers to ever solve. So, everyone has trusted that these locks would hold forever, but this new Google paper is drawing a pretty clear timeline for when those locks might turn into nothing more than decoration. Pretty to look at, but not actually keeping anything safe anymore. Here's what the researchers are saying in plain terms. They believe quantum computers might need way fewer resources than anyone thought before to break 256-bit elliptic curve problems. We're talking under 500,000 physical qubits. That's not some far-off dream from 50 years in the future. It's a real engineering goal that could actually happen around 2029. Think about what that means for a second. Any public key that's ever been shown out in the open, any transaction that's sitting and waiting in a mempool, and any wallet that has sent money before, all of those could suddenly become vulnerable. Cryptographers have a name for this kind of attack: harvest now, decrypt later. Bad actors could grab the data right now while it's still protected, and then wait until quantum computers are strong enough to crack it open years later. But the really interesting part, and why this feels like such big gossip, is that the paper doesn't just lump every blockchain together and say they're all in the same boat. No, the Google team actually creates this whole classification system, like sorting kids into groups at school. They separate the networks that are already getting ready for this quantum future from the ones that are still acting like nothing's going to change. And guess what? The XRP ledger gets put right in with the leaders, the ones who are taking it seriously, not with the ones who are lagging way behind. The researchers specifically call out that the XRP ledger has already been running experimental versions of post-quantum cryptographic signatures on its testnet. They talk about how the ledger has this built-in support for something called smart signatures. That feature lets the whole system upgrade and switch to newer quantum-safe methods without causing the entire network to break or crash. They also point to the validator coordination system on XRPL. That setup makes it possible to roll out big upgrades in a smooth, organized way, something that proof-of-work chains like Bitcoin just can't copy easily because they don't have that same kind of structure. It's not like these mentions are hidden deep in some boring footnote either. The Google team brings up the XRP ledger front and center in the sections where they're discussing real-world asset tokenization, protocol-level innovations, and clear roadmaps for how networks can migrate safely. When they needed solid, real-life examples of blockchains that are actually preparing for the quantum threat, they kept coming back to the XRP ledger again and again, 14 times total. That's not random. That's them noticing something important. Now let me slow down and walk you through the numbers that most regular investors never even think about. These numbers are what turn this from, oh, that's interesting, into a much bigger, stronger idea. The paper points out that there are roughly 6.7 million bitcoins sitting in addresses where the public keys have already been exposed. At current prices, that adds up to more than $400 billion worth of bitcoin that could become harvestable the moment those cryptographically relevant quantum machines arrive. Ethereum faces similar kinds of exposure across its whole smart contract world. Solana has its own special attack surfaces because of how it's built. The Google researchers go through all these risks very carefully, one by one. But here's the key difference they highlight. Migrating to new quantum-safe systems isn't equally easy for every network. The difficulty changes a lot depending on how each blockchain was designed from the start. For Bitcoin, pulling off a massive upgrade would mean getting millions of individual users, thousands of nodes, and a very opinionated community all to agree at the same time. And we all know that community has split and fought over much smaller changes in the past. The paper even spells out the catch-22 situation Bitcoin is stuck in. It desperately needs these huge upgrades, but it has no central coordination mechanism to actually make them happen smoothly. Compare that to the XRP ledger, because it has that validator coordination system and the smart signature capabilities already built in. There's a clear technical pathway for moving to post-quantum cryptography without chaos. Plus, the escrow mechanisms that already manage billions of dollars in token releases show that the protocol knows how to evolve in a controlled, step-by-step way instead of everything happening at once in a messy rush. Now let's layer on the actual usefulness of these networks in the real world, because that's where things get even more exciting. Cross-border payments move something like $150 trillion every single year. The foreign exchange market alone processes $7.5 trillion every day. And tokenized real-world assets, things like houses, stocks, bonds, or even art, turned into digital tokens, are expected to grow past $4 trillion in the coming wave. When a big institution is trying to decide which blockchain to build their long-term settlement layer on for the next 20 years, they're not just asking which one is fast and cheap right now. They're asking a much smarter question: which one is going to survive the quantum transition without forcing me to tear down and rebuild my entire infrastructure from scratch? That's why the XRP ledger's early work on post-quantum cryptography isn't just some nice extra feature you can ignore. For serious institutional-grade systems, it's becoming a basic requirement for managing risk. The Google paper groups the XRP ledger together with the networks that already have protocol-level support for tokenizing real-world assets. It specifically notes the compliance controls, the issuer permission systems, and the asset metadata features that make it suitable for big professional use cases. Think about it like this. Would a giant asset manager like BlackRock ever move billions of dollars into something without rock-solid legal certainty first? Would a major custodian like Fidelity spend time and money building infrastructure for assets if the regulatory path wasn't clear? Would a sovereign wealth fund from another country put serious money into a technology without doing deep, multi-decade checks on whether it can last? Of course not. These aren't gamblers throwing darts at a board. They make decisions based on careful, rigorous risk analysis. And now, that risk analysis has a brand new item on the checklist: quantum readiness. The paper doesn't stop at just describing the problem. It actually calls on communities like the one behind the XRP ledger to publish concrete, detailed post-quantum roadmaps before the end of this decade. Why? Because regulators and big institutions are going to start demanding those exact plans before they're willing to commit any serious capital. You can see the direction Ripple itself is heading if you look at their recent moves. They acquired Hidden Road, which is a prime broker that works with institutional clients. They also brought in G Treasury, which provides infrastructure for treasury management. This isn't a company just trying to sell tokens to regular retail traders for quick speculation. This is a company quietly building the actual plumbing, the behind-the-scenes pipes and systems that the next era of finance is going to run on. The institutional signals have never been louder, but you have to actually be paying attention to notice them. Let me get specific about the timeline that's unfolding right now. The Google paper sets 2029 as the realistic target window for when cryptographically relevant quantum machines could arrive. That's not some vague someday threat that we can ignore for decades. It's a concrete deadline that squeezes all the preparation time into just the next several years. The paper is very clear that networks need to have published migration roadmaps ready before that window opens up. Regulators will expect to see them. Institutional risk committees will require them. Even insurance companies will start pricing risk differently based on who has a plan and who doesn't. Now let's connect that to what's happening on the regulatory side at the same time. Momentum keeps building around the Digital Asset Clarity Act and similar efforts. The SEC's position on XRP after the Ripple court case created a level of structural clarity that a lot of other tokens still don't have. Japan's Financial Services Agency has already officially classified XRP as a utility token instead of a security, and that decision is becoming a kind of template that other countries are studying closely. These aren't separate random events happening in different corners of the world. They're all converging together like different roads, meeting at one big intersection. When that regulatory clarity finally settles in fully, the extra risk premium that has kept XRP's price lower than its actual usefulness might finally disappear. At the same time, when institutions start adding quantum risk requirements to their checklists, any networks that don't have clear post-quantum cryptography roadmaps could get left out of consideration completely. The XRP ledger is sitting right at the sweet spot where both of these big forces are coming together. Here's another way to look at it that a lot of regular holders haven't really thought about yet. We are slowly moving from an era where there's plenty of everything to an era where certain things start becoming scarce. And I'm not just talking about the obvious stuff. Look at the on-chain data. Exchange reserves for XRP have been draining steadily for a while now. Tokens are moving out of exchanges and into cold storage, into institutional custody wallets, and into the hands of long-term holders. The size of the transactions and where they're going suggest this isn't just regular retail investors buying a little here and there. It looks more like institutional positioning. Once a bunch of tokens get locked away inside multi-signature institutional vaults, they usually don't come back out to the open market just because the price jumps 10%. They stay put because they're being held as strategic infrastructure for actual future use, for settlement, for payments, for tokenization projects. That reduces the amount of XRP that's freely available for trading. On top of that, there's the burn mechanic. Every single transaction on the XRP ledger destroys a tiny, tiny amount of the token permanently. Right now, with normal daily activity, the burn rate looks pretty small and easy to ignore. But if usage really starts scaling up because of huge volumes from cross-border payments and tokenized asset settlements, that burn rate will grow too. The total supply is fixed at 100 billion XRP. Escrow-locked tokens get released on a predictable schedule, but a lot of them end up getting relocked again. Institutional accumulation keeps picking up speed, and the burn keeps removing small pieces forever. All of that together means the liquid supply that regular people can easily buy is slowly getting tighter and tighter, while the real-world demand drivers keep getting bigger and stronger. I know it can feel tough sometimes. You sit there watching the price just consolidate or move sideways for months while all these important structural things are quietly happening in the background. The headlines can make you doubt yourself. The timeline can feel way longer than your patience wants it to be, but when you step back and look at it like an analyst would, you start to see the difference between noise and real signal. The noise is the daily price candles going up and down a little bit. The noise is all the drama and FUD flying around on social media. The noise is mainstream financial news channels still talking about crypto like it's the same wild speculation game it was back in 2017. But the real signal, the stuff that actually matters for the long run, is Google's quantum AI division mentioning the XRP ledger 14 times in a serious technical paper about which blockchains are going to survive the next big technological era. The signal is all the institutional-grade infrastructure that's already live and working on the XRP ledger for tokenizing real-world assets. The signal is the regulatory clarity that's opening doors for XRP in ways that many other projects still don't have. Feeling like you're early can sometimes feel exactly the same as feeling like you're wrong, right up until the moment when everything suddenly lines up and reality catches up fast. The direction the math is pointing, utility, tightening supply, and what big institutions actually need, makes the overall picture pretty clear. The real question isn't whether XRP will reach higher valuations at some point. The math on usefulness, on how the available supply is shrinking, and on what institutions will demand for long-term safety makes the direction obvious. The bigger question is who is still going to be holding when $4 starts looking like a solid floor instead of a high price, when $6 becomes normal conversation, when people talking about $10 or more stop getting laughed at as dreamers and start getting recognized as the ones who followed the structural thesis all the way to its logical end. Institutions have spent years trying different ways to shake regular holders out of their positions so they could quietly take them over. Don't make it easy for them. Hold on to the structure if you see it. Let me wrap this thought with one last point that really stuck with me. Google didn't have to mention the XRP ledger even once. They could have written a completely generic paper about quantum threats and never named any specific blockchain networks at all. Instead, their researchers chose to cite the XRP ledger 14 different times as a clear example of a network that's proactively preparing for what's coming. That isn't paid hype or marketing talk. That's validation coming from one of the most technically advanced and respected organizations on the entire planet, and they have zero financial reason to promote any particular coin. Price can go up and down and feel temporary, but real, solid infrastructure that's built to last, that's permanent. The blockchains that make it through the quantum transition won't necessarily be the ones with the loudest online communities or the biggest market caps right now. They'll be the ones that started getting ready while there was still enough time left to do it properly. The XRP ledger clearly started preparing. The only question left is simple. Are you paying attention to all the daily noise, or are you watching the deeper structure that's forming underneath everything?